Hello students, welcome back to Purana, the geography series. And when we look at today's topic, that we are going to see about the various disasters that are present. And when we talk about the various disasters that are present, you need to see that this particular section of this particular paper is going to be in convergence with GS3. As we know that in GS3, we are going to emphasize upon the disaster management perspective. But whereas when you look at this perspective, we would emphasize upon the disaster susceptibility of a particular geographical condition or of a particular region. That is the fundamental understanding that you have to see. Although there is an overlap here, the emphasis on the geographical factors or the geographical features which is making a particular region susceptible to a particular disaster. That has to be emphasized. And whenever we are making a notes upon such a kind of thing, it's a very, very simple thing that we have to keep in mind that be it any disaster, the first thing that we need to talk about is what is the status of the disaster with respect to Indian condition. For example, when you're talking about cyclones, around 70% of the coastal region is impacted. When you're talking about earthquakes, around 60% is impacted, right? So, when you're talking about the volcanic activity or when you're talking about landslides, there is a variation that is existing. So, automatically what happens is first you have to talk about the status of that particular disaster. Once you talk about the status of that particular disaster, we also have to talk about what are the causes of that particular disaster. And once we discuss about the causes, as part of the causes, we have to talk about what are the natural causes and what are the anthropogenic causes. And once we discuss about the causes, that is with respect to the natural causes and anthropogenic causes, then we have to talk about what are the measures that we are going to take. And when you talk about this, what are the measures that we are going to take, these measures can be of two types. These measures can be structural measures or these measures can be non-structural measures. So, it can be either structural measures or non-structural measures with respect to the mitigation, with respect to the adaptation, with respect to the controlling of that particular disaster, reducing the risk of that disaster. That has to be emphasized upon, right? So, this is with respect to the note making, right? When you look at the sample question today, we will look at this particular question that we mention the global occurrence of volcanic eruptions in 2021 and their impact on the regional environment. Let's look at this question, right? So, the first ritual that we do is we identify what are the keywords that are present with respect to this question. And when we look at the keywords with respect to this question, it is asking about the global occurrence of volcanic eruption categorically in 2021. This is one aspect. The second aspect we see is discuss their impacts. Discuss their impacts on what? The regional environment. Regional environment. So, when you talk about the keywords, these are the keywords and this is the context of the question. And understanding the keywords and understanding the context of the question, we have to look at what is going to be the structure. And when we look at that, what is going to be the structure with respect to this particular answer, that we would start away with the volcanic activity, right? Or we would talk about that circum-Pacific belt is more susceptible to volcanic activity. That kind of introduction can be given. And once we give that, we would talk about the various incidents that occurred over the global level and global occurrences that we talk. And once we talk about the global occurrences, we are going to talk about the what are the impacts. Because when we look at the volcanic eruption, what happens is we would have the eruption of lava, we would have the eruption of the pyroclastic material, right? We would have the eruption of this pyroclastic material and it might be with respect to ash content, it might be with respect to the particulate matter, it might be with respect to the gases or it might be with respect to the water vapor. All of these are going to be emitted with the eruption. And once we see this, these emissions will have an impact with respect to the climatic condition. That is what is being asked. We have to discuss about these impacts. And then, what is going to be the way forward here? Way forward in managing such a kind of element. And once we talk about this, then moving on to the next aspect that we generally see is what is going to be the content with respect to this answer. And when we look at the content aspect with respect to this answer, we see that we have simply defined what is a volcanic eruption. And we said that it is nothing but the eruption of lava and tephra. Tephra is nothing but your rest of your pyroclastic material apart from the lava. And once we discuss about this, then we talk about the various volcanic eruptions that occurred in this year. That 2021, Hunga Tonga, then Tal volcano, right, La Palma, all these are different kinds of volcanic eruptions that occurred in 2021. And this question was part of 2021 GS1 paper, right? So, once we have discussed, this is a factual base that you need to understand and you need to write. And once we talk about this, the impact of the local or impact on the local environment. And we talk about the impact, we talk about it is with respect to reducing the visibility. It is about the acting as a pseudo cloud over that particular region, because there is so much of emission that happens. There is so much of composition that happens with respect to your volcanic eruptions. Then it can also result in events of volcanic lightning. Apart from that, this can also act as a reflector with respect to the solar insolation. And because of this reflecting nature of the contents and the constituents or the composition of the volcanic eruption, what can happen is it can virtually have a cooling effect of that particular environment or of that particular region. That is what we have discussed, localized cooling effect, right? Then the volcanic ashes might increase the soil productivity. Then apart from that, you also know that these are going to have a lot of emissions which can have an impact with respect to air pollution, right? Then it can also have certain tectonic activity generation. Now, all these are impacts with respect to the local environment. And once we discuss the impacts on local environment, then we can straight away conclude that volcanism is fundamentally about understanding the exogenic and endogenic processes that occur within the interiors. And based on that, it is going to have its own impact, its own consequences with respect to such a kind of eruption that occurs in different parts of the world. That's what you can simply conclude. It's a straightforward question. There's no much interpretation that is needed in such a question. Now, what is the +1 strategy? And when we talk about the +1 strategy with respect to such a question, as it is a straightforward question, you can talk about the drawing of the circum-Pacific belt. The drawing of the circum-Pacific belt and showing that this particular belt is highly susceptible to volcanic eruptions. This can be one impact. Then we can talk about that one particular thing can be talked about is climate engineering phenomena. That this is going to act as a natural source of climate engineering for the reason when we talk about certain mitigative technologies, we talk about something called as stratospheric aerosol injections. And when we talk about this stratospheric aerosol injection techniques, what happens is those act as a micro reflectors with respect to solar insolation and reducing the incoming radiation and further reducing the impact of the global warming. And when you look at the emissions of the volcanic eruption, it is going to virtually act as those micro reflectors that we discussed in stratospheric aerosol injection. So that element can also be brought in as a point of interlinkage, and that is a very good +1 strategy and talking about climate engineering, right? Now with this, let's talk about one aspect with respect to a practice question. We can talk about the cyclones. Tropical cyclones are largely confined to South China Sea, Bay of Bengal and Gulf of Mexico. Why? That can be one question that can be used as a practice question, and the model answer for such a question is given in the link that is provided in the description.